Have you ever felt like your mind won't stop moving? Even when the world around, you stand still, like there's a constant hum of thoughts behind your eyes, a quiet storm you can't escape. You tell yourself to relax, to just be present. But the mind refuses to rest. It wanders into every memory, dissects every word, imagines 1,000 futures that never happen. Even in silence, it's too loud inside. You think and then you think about the fact that you're thinking. Music. You watch others laugh easily, live easily, love easily, and you wonder what it must feel like to exist without constantly analyzing every heartbeat. For you, nothing is ever simple. Every smile hides a question. Every goodbye becomes a thesis. You feel too much, think too much, care too much, and it's both your superpower and your curse. You weren't always this way. There was a time when you felt without needing to understand. But somewhere along the way, the mind became your shield, a fortress built from logic and memory to protect you from pain. Psychology calls it hypervigilance, the brain's way of staying alert to danger long after the danger has passed. Perhaps you learned early that safety isn't guaranteed, so you began scanning the world for, meaning predicting the next storm before it arrived. But this kind of awareness comes at a cost. The more you think, the less you feel connected to life itself. Every emotion gets filtered. Every experience examined under the microscope of reason. You become both the actor and the audience, unable to surrender to the moment because you're too busy interpreting it. In neuroscience, they call it analysis paralysis, the freezing effect that happens when the mind spirals into infinite possibilities. Unable to choose just one, you begin to notice patterns in people's behavior, in your own reactions. In the cycles of love and loneliness, you see truths, others overlook the fragile seams, holding relationships together, the unspoken fears behind a friend's laughter. And yet, the more you see, the harder it becomes to belong. You crave understanding, but it isolates you. You crave connection, but you overthink it until it slips away. There's a line between awareness and obsession, between curiosity and self, torment, and deep thinkers often walk it alone. You live in a world that rewards quick answers, yet your mind hungers for questions that have none. So you keep searching through thoughts, through dreams, through sleepless nights, not because you want to suffer, but because you cannot live without knowing why. But no one is born this way. The roots of deep thinking often begin in silence. It always begins quietly. A small child in a dimly lit room, sitting cross-legged on the floor, drawing while voices rise behind a closed door. They don't understand the words, but they feel the tension. They study the air, the pauses, the trembling tones between sentences. Before they can even name emotion, they can read it. And so they learn early not to cry, not to shout, not to need too much, but to observe. You might remember that feeling, standing in a home where love was unpredictable, where affection came and went like weather. Maybe your parents weren't cruel. Maybe they were just distant, distracted, or too consumed by their own pain to notice yours. So, you noticed everything. You became the quiet one, the one who watched, understood, and adapted. The one who could sense an argument before it began. Psychologists call this hypervigilance, the survival strategy of a child who learns that awareness means safety. The brain, still soft and forming, stretches itself to predict moods, tone shifts, the faintest cues of danger. It's the birth of overthinking, not as intellect, but as instinct. The mind becomes a daxed radar, scanning constantly for the tremor that comes before the storm. You tell yourself, you're just curious. You tell tell yourself you're strong, but deep down, it's fear disguised as understanding a need to feel in control in a world that often wasn't. You learn to find patterns in people, to decode faces, to soothe others before soothing yourself. You become the peacemaker, the little philosopher trying to solve chaos with empathy. Attachment theory explains this with painful precision. When secure, love is absent. The child's brain fills the gaps with meaning. You analyze your parents' silences, their moods, their sighs, because your nervous system is trying to survive emotional uncertainty. You begin to live in your head more than your body. Feelings become puzzles, emotions become data, and soon thought becomes your only refuge. But that kind of depth comes with loneliness. While other children played freely, you were already building theories about why people hurt each other, why they leave, why they lie. You felt older than your age, too aware, too awake. You carried emotions larger than your body could hold, and so you tucked them away behind quiet eyes. The world mistook your silence for peace. But inside, your mind never stopped whispering questions. That child, the one who noticed everything, learned to survive through thought. But survival is not the same as living. Reflection became protection. Awareness became armor. And even as years passed, that same mind never stopped watching, predicting, analyzing. That child grows up, and the ability that once protected them becomes the very thing that isolates them. At some point, the child who once watched in silence becomes an AGO adult who cannot stop analyzing everything. You wear your intellect like a second skin, polished, composed, and impenetrable. People admire how deeply you understand things. They come to you for advice, for interpretation, for meaning. You're the one who can explain the unexplainable, who can find the lesson in the heartbreak, who can turn chaos into language. But beneath that, clarity lies exhaustion, the fatigue of always being the one who knows. You've learned to survive through thinking. It became your armor long before you realized it. Every observation sharpens your mind, but dulls your ability to feel. When someone hurts you, you don't rage. You analyze, you trace their behavior back to childhood trauma, to fear, to insecurity. You tell yourself, you understand, and therefore you shouldn't feel pain. But deep down you do. You just don't let yourself admit it. It's strange, isn't it? The way emotional intelligence can become a shield. The way empathy, once your strength, begins to separate you from others. You read people so well that you start predicting their rejection before it happens. You prepare for heartbreak before love can even begin. It's not cynicism, it's self-defense, disguised as wisdom. The mask of insight protects you, but it also keeps you at a distance from the world you long to touch. Psychologists call this cognitive avoidance, the mind's way of staying safe. By staying busy, by analyzing, you avoid vulnerability. You avoid the chaos of simply feeling. Neuroscience shows that overthinkers often have heightened activity in the prefrontal cortex, the brain's reasoning center, and reduced emotional regulation in the lick system. In simple terms, you think to survive, but in doing so, you forget how to live. You tell yourself that knowledge will bring peace, but peace never arrives, because understanding is not the same as acceptance. You can decode the mechanics of love and still feel unloved. You can study the nature of happiness and still not taste it. The labyrinth of thought keeps you safe from others, unpredictability, but it also locks you inside yourself. Sometimes you meet someone who almost breaks through, someone who makes you feel seen instead of studied. But even Then you hesitate. You search their words for subtext, their silences for meaning. You mistake vulnerability for danger, because once upon a time it was. So you remain the observer, the philosopher, the mind behind the glass, brilliant, articulate, and alone. You can explain everything except why. Understanding everything never feels like enough. But even the sharpest minds crave grounding. And science has tried to decode why deep thinkers see the world differently. Your mind is not chaotic, it's just active. Even in silence, it hums with a quiet electricity. Neuroscientists call it the default mode network, the part of the brain responsible for self-reflection, imagination, and meaning-making. For most people, this network quiets down when they're at rest. But for you, it never switches off. It loops, reflects, revisits, replays. Not out of choice, but design. You don't just experience moments. You process them, dissect them, and search for what they mean long after they're gone. Studies show that deep thinkers, the introspective, sensitive, highly open minds, have more connectivity between brain regions that handle memory, imagination, and emotional processing. This means your brain isn't linear. It's woven like a web. Every thought connects to another. Every emotion links to 10 others, forming intricate patterns of reflection that others might never notice. You could call it intelligence, intuition, or creativity, but it's also overstimulation. Your brain doesn't just think about the world, it absorbs it. Psychologists often associate this with a trait called openness to experience one of the big 5 personality dimensions. Those who score high on it are curious, imaginative, and sensitive to beauty and meaning. But that same openness comes with a cost: emotional vulnerability, because the doors of your perception are wide open. Everything gets in the joy, the pain, the noise. You don't just see the world, you feel its weight pressing against your mind. And then there's empathy, that double-edged gift. Research shows that people with higher mirror neuron activity often internalize others' emotions as their own. You walk into a room and feel the tension before anyone speaks. You sense unspoken pain. You can't help it. Your brain is wired to tune in, but that tuning means your emotional bandwidth is constantly occupied. You live with background noise that never fades. Some studies even suggest that deep thinkers often oscillate between 2 neural states: the analytical network and the empathic network, systems that rarely coexist easily. When one activates, the other resists. So you swing between reason and emotion, analysis and empathy, logic and sensitivity. It's a tug of war inside your own head, an elegant chaos only you can feel. There's beauty in that complexity. It's what gives rise to art, philosophy, and self-awareness. But there's danger too, because when the same circuits that create meaning also magnify pain, you begin to drown in your own depth. You start to mistake thinking for control and rumination for clarity. The brain that never stops can stops, can sums, can stops, can stops, can stops, can sups. See truth others miss, but it can also trap you in it. But the same depth that gives insight can also turn against itself, creating an invisible darkness only deep thinkers truly know. There's a moment when your mind turns against you. It doesn't announce itself. It slips in, quietly, somewhere between reflection and obsession. What once felt like wisdom begins to feel like weight. You can't stop thinking, analyzing, decoding, until your thoughts no longer serve you. They consume you. You lie awake at night, your body still, but your brain alive, replaying words you wish you hadn't said, futures that never happened, possibilities that never end. It's a form of insomnia that doesn't need darkness. It can follow you through the brightest day. Carl Jung called it the shadow, the unacknowledged parts of the self that grow stronger the more we try to suppress them. The deep thinker's shadow is thought itself. It's the same brilliance that once offered clarity, now tightening around your mind like a vice. Every idea becomes a doorway into another. Every conclusion collapses into a new question. You start to wonder whether your intelligence is a gift or a trap. You see meaning in everything, but peace in nothing. There's a reason for this torment. The human brain was never meant to bear infinite awareness. Cognitive science suggests that overactivity in the default mode, network, the same system that fuels introspection, can blur the line between creativity and rumination. You don't just think about life. You interrogate it. You question the purpose of love, the fairness of suffering, the nature of existence itself. It's beautiful and unbearable. You feel detached from others because your mind lives several layers beneath the surface. Conversations feel shallow, laughter feels temporary, and connection feels conditional. You envy those who live without needing to understand. To them, the world just is. To you, the world must always mean, and in chasing, meaning, you begin to lose touch with life itself. The philosopher Nature once warned that when you stare too long into the abyss stares back. You begin to sense that the quiet dread of being trapped inside your own depth. Thought becomes both your sanctuary and your cell. You start to notice your reflection everywhere in people's eyes, in passing words, in sleepless hours. The mirror never stops reflecting, but it never reveals peace. It's not madness. It's sensitivity turned inward, intellect stretched to its breaking point. You can't stop thinking, not because you love knowledge, but because you fear what silence might reveal. You fear that without thought, you might have to finally feel. And yet, even this torment isn't born in isolation. It's shaped by the world we live in. Have you ever felt like you were born into the wrong era? Like your mind speaks a slower, quieter language that the world no longer understands? You look around and see people moving fast, talking, loud, scrolling endlessly, their eyes flickering like screens, their hearts chasing the next distraction. Everything is urgent. Everything is instant. And yet, nothing feels real. In a world addicted to noise, silence has become rebellion. You've probably felt it. That strange dissonance between your depth and society's pace. You pause to think, but the world punishes hesitation. You search for meaning, but meaning takes time, and time is what no one has anymore. The digital age has trained attention like a muscle that now twitches at every notification. Even your thoughts compete with the hum of algorithms whispering what you should want, who you should be, and how fast you should move. The result is quiet, suffocation, not of the body, but of the mind. Psychologists now call this cognitive overload, the burnout of a brain, constantly overstimulated but rarely nourished. Studies show that attention spans have dropped sharply over the past 2 decades, not because we've grown less intelligent, but because we've grown more fragmented. Our mental bandwidth is split into pieces, each one chasing novelty over understanding. For a deep thinker, this fragmentation feels like spiritual exile. You see the world's complexity, its beauty, and its pain, but the culture around you only wants sound, bites, and certainty. You begin to hide your depth because it makes others uncomfortable. You soften your opinions, dilute your thoughts, laugh at jokes that don't amuse you all, to seem normal in a culture that mistakes apathy for maturity. But beneath that mask, something aches. You crave real connection, real dialogue, real stillness. Yet when you try to speak the language of introspection, it echoes back unheard. And still you refuse to become hollow, because deep thinking in this era of distraction is not just rare, it's revolutionary. 2. Slow down is an act of defiance. To feel deeply is to resist desensitization. 2. Question everything is to reclaim your mind from the machinery of mass conformity. You are the quiet rebel, not fighting with noise, but with awareness. But even rebels grow weary because the cost of seeing deeply is feeling deeply. And when the world keeps moving faster, your mind so heavy with meaning begins to fall behind. There's a strange kind of exhaustion that comes from feeling everything. You don't collapse from running or working. You collapse from thinking, from caring too deeply, from seeing patterns others don't see, and carrying meanings no one else feels. It's the fatigue that comes not from doing but from perceiving. Your mind becomes heavy, not with noise but with understanding. You walk through life with eyes that never stop noticing. The couple arguing quietly at the cafe. The cashier forcing a smile that doesn't reach her eyes. The friend who says, "I'm fine," in a tone that trembles just slightly. You pick up on all of it. You absorb it. And while others move on, you carry the fragments home. They stay with you, echoing through your mind like unfinished sentences. That's the hidden price of awareness. Every truth you see settles inside you. Psychologists call it empathy fatigue, the emotional burnout that comes from prolonged sensitivity. The same neural circuits that make you compassionate also flood your system with cortisol and adrenaline. When overstimulated, your brain, designed for survival, interprets every emotional signal as a small emergency. The result is an invisible stress, an inner trembling you can't quite name. You smile, you function, but inside it feels like you're always slightly bracing for something. This is what happens when consciousness becomes too awake. You start to feel responsible for everything. For the world's pain, for the world fragility of relationships, even for your own inability to stay numb. Your empathy, once a light, begins to burn. You want to care, but you're tired of caring. You want to love, but love feels like lifting a mountain. You want to rest, but your mind refuses to dim. You are both the observer and the vessel, endlessly absorbing, endlessly analyzing, endlessly feeling. And yet beneath the weariness lies something sacred, because this kind of exhaustion doesn't come from emptiness. It comes from depth, from living with eyes wide open in a world that rewards blindness. It means your heart is still alive enough to ache, that you have not become hardened by indifference. Even when indifference would be easier, still the burden is real. The inability to turn off the mind can blur the line between wisdom and sorrow. You begin to wonder if awareness is worth its cost, if knowing too much about life steals your ability to live it freely. But even as you question it, something inside you resists giving up your depth. Because somewhere quietly, you sense that this weight you carry, this ache of understanding holds meaning of its own. Yet within this weight lies the seed of transformation. If one learns not to silence their depth, but to live with it differently, there comes a point when you realize you can't think your way out of everything. You've tried dissecting every feeling, every silence, every moment that broke you. But the truth is, not every wound can be solved with understanding. Some things are meant to be felt, not fixed. The healing of a deep thinker doesn't come from thinking more. It comes from remembering how to be. You begin to see that peace isn't the absence of thought. It's the art of not believing every one of them. The brain that never stops will never be silenced, but it can be softened. Neuroscience calls this neuroplasticity, the mind's ability to reshape itself through new habits, new awareness, new compassion. The same circuits that once looped in fear and analysis can over time learn to rest. Mindfulness isn't about emptying your thoughts. It's about holding them without drowning in them. You start to notice the small things again. Sunlight trembling through the curtains. The rhythm of your own breath. The warmth of a cup in your hand. You begin to inhabit your body, not just your mind. Psychologists call this embodiment, grounding your awareness in the present moment, anchoring it where life actually happens. Because no matter how intelligent your thoughts are, I can't experience the world for you. Only your senses can. Slowly, you learn to draw boundaries not around people, but around your inner world. You stop letting every problem rent space in your mind. You stop overanalyzing every silence. You start asking, does this thought serve me or does it starve me? Journaling becomes a form of release, not an intellectual exercise, but an exhale of everything unspoken. Creating, whether through words, art, or movement, becomes a bridge between what you feel and what you let go. And perhaps the most radical act of healing is connection. To speak your truth without over-explaining it. To sit across from someone and be fully there, not lost in internal analysis. To share silence without needing to fill it. When you live from your depth, life stops being something to decode. It becomes something to experience. You begin to realize that being a deep thinker was never the problem. The problem was believing that depth required suffering. You were never too much, only too awake, in a world afraid of its own reflection. And perhaps the greatest wisdom of all is realizing that thinking deeply was never the curse. Forgetting how to feel was, there comes a moment after all the persetters, questions, after the restless nights and relentless analysis, when your mind simply grows tired, not defeated, not broken, just weary of its own noise. You start to notice that all your searching, all your philosophizing has been a long journey in circles. You have read every map, chased every truth, and yet the peace you longed for never lived in the destination. It was always in the stillness beneath your steps. You begin to realize that your thoughts, as brilliant as they are, have been both compass and cage. They guided you through darkness, but they also kept you trapped inside it. Every answer opened a new question. Every understanding revealed another layer. You've stared into infinity long enough to see that the mind's pursuit of certainty is endless, and that the deepest freedom comes when you stop demanding answers and begin allowing awareness. Neuroscience has shown that the human brain lights up with constant activity. Even in rest, a flicker of electrical daughter, storms dancing through the default mode, network. But beneath those neural waves lies something quieter, something science can't quite measure, consciousness itself, the space in which thought appears and disappears. The still observer behind every question you've ever asked. Philosophers like Alan Watts often said that the goal of thinking is to eventually realize the futility of thought. Jung called it individuation. The moment you integrate both light and shadow and realize there was never anything to fight. It's the paradox of awakening that the more you understand, the less you need to explain. You start to trade complexity for clarity, noise for nuance, seeking for seeing. There's a certain humility in this stage, a surrender that doesn't feel like loss, but liberation. You no longer need to interpret every silence, decode every emotion, or name every mystery. You begin to sit with life as it is unedited, unfiltered enough, you start to feel the world instead of thinking it to death. You breathe, not to calm the mind, but to remember that you are something beyond it. And in that stillness, you discover a truth that feels ancient and new all at once. That true intelligence isn't in endless analysis, but in presence. That wisdom is not in knowing more, but in needing less. The mind is a beautiful servant, but a terrible master. And one day, when all the questions fall silent, you finally hear it. That quiet pulse beneath thought, whispering what you'd been chasing all along. You were never meant to think your way to peace, only to remember you already are it.